For your Saturday evoking of spiritual change through words and creative artistry, tune in now for the Creative Inspiration with Chantel.
Ever go to the same movie with your designated movie buddy, only to find out that one of you had an Oscar-winning experience while the other one encountered a horror flick sure to haunt them for the next 7 days? Oh, trust me, it absolutely happens and has actually happened to me. I recall a space and time where my sister and I were running into multiple scheduling conflicts when we were attempting to catch a movie together. We had deemed it a must-see. Now, this was one of those movies where we had read and fallen in love with the book first, which positioned us in a place of high anticipation of the film's release. In an effort not to miss it in the theater, we decided that we would go and see it separately, and then we'd reserve some time later in the week to come together to compare notes. Now, I must admit, I was giddy when I arrived to watch this film, and rightfully so. It exceeded my expectations. Now, even though the book was still the reigning champion in my opinion, I thoroughly enjoyed seeing the riveting love affair unfold on screen. It was a splendid tale of undying romance with a few unexpected plot twists that had been sprinkled with a little bit of comedy and a taste of action. At least that was my perception of the movie. Now, upon my sister's arrival for dinner that next week, I could already tell that we weren't quite on the same page with this one. Based on the discontentment weaved throughout her feedback, I was sure that she had been misdirected in the theater and ended up watching another film. She was unequivocally displeased with the direction the storyline had taken, as well as with the caliber of actors tasked with carrying out the story. She felt as though the narrative veered too far away from what had been captured in the book. She admitted that she actually lost interest pretty early on and left halfway through the movie. Though this was not necessarily a huge deal, it did strike me strange that she would have this type of behavior and commentary. Now, in the past, even if she didn't particularly love a movie, she'd still stick it out until the end. Truth is, it wasn't even the fact that we disagreed, but more so what I felt as she communicated her observation. For some reason, I've never been able to forget that indescribable feeling that I experienced in that moment. And then I thought to myself that maybe one day I'll come to receive an answer to all the questioning that was mulling around in my mind. Or perhaps I would go on forever wondering what that emotion was all about. I'd settled that only time would tell. Now, you know what? Now that I'm older and can appreciate it, I've come to this one conclusion. Innocence is a beautiful stage that should be maintained as long as possible and relentlessly cherished along the way. When my baby sister and I reached the ages of 7 and 9, we, with our innocent selves, established a pact that solidified that we were officially besties. Oh yeah, we created a secret handshake and some code language to help to keep our confidences safe. This was a relationship that existed outside of our sisterhood. Now, we were born sisters, but now we were making the choice to be friends, and best friends at that. From that very time frame forward, we did very little without each other. We rode our bikes together, we jumped rope together, we sang in the children's choir together, we got in trouble together, we watched television together, and as we grew older, movies really became our thing. Both of us were creatives that enjoyed the artistry of the industry. We both loved the same genres, many of the same players, and enjoyed picking the films apart only to put them back together again during our constructive reviews. Due to the intensity and passion that we shared for cinema, we both migrated towards similar industry interests when selecting our area of study for college. Now, my sister had chosen the path of screenwriting while I settled on the producing aspect. We often would have this intense yet rather intriguing dialogue related to the ingenuity of some of the most fascinating storytellers and the actors who had been appointed the task of giving feet to the vision of the writer. We would debate for hours on who held the top positions in the business. Now, sometimes we agreed, and other times we found ourselves on opposing sides of the fence. But this was our time of bonding. This was us. During our college tenure, we faced and endured some unfamiliar territory. Now, we found ourselves physically separated more often than we'd ever been accustomed to in the past. Our family was very close-knit. Our parents had done an amazing job of laying a firm foundation that was founded in Christianity and rooted in the strength and union of our family unit. This was the reason that we both decided to remain in our hometown for our education. The schools we had chosen were neighboring universities that were settled roughly about 20 minutes apart. Adapting and getting acclimated to our new life was the current culprit. Our schedules were quite different, and we had engaged in some new friendships, but this made us even more determined to remain as devoted to one another as possible. And we did. We refused to let anyone or anything come in between us. We supported one another at various networking events and showcasing opportunities. And having one another's visible encouragement was invaluable. As part of our relationship maintenance, we decided to establish a sister-to-sister day that occurred once a week. Now, this was a designated time where we came together just to catch up and have either lunch or dinner together. Just the two of us, uninterrupted, undistracted. It was just like old times, and we truly enjoyed each other's company. Now, there was sometimes evidence of that in our laughter, and sometimes we cried unintentionally when one of those moments would catch us off guard. We would engage in some conversations that were so profound that we would forget that there were even others around us until eventually they weren't. We were related by blood, but had been knitted together in heart and in spirit through a choice we had made early on in life. Now, though we shared many similarities, there were some differences that existed between us too. Now, I was the more practical one. I was always proceeding with caution and thorough examination of any proposed or current situation. I was known to be very careful and meticulous in my efforts. Now, my sister, on the other hand, was the polar opposite of what I just described. Honey, she was carefree, throw caution to the wind type of spirit. And she believed in and embraced freedom to the fullest. She lived out her liberation in every way and on every day that she awoke with breath in her body. As an example, now once I graduated from college, I decided to take up an offer with a local news station to get some hands-on experience with producing shows on a more smaller scale before delving right into the big-time, big-screen movies. I wanted to have a solid grasp on what I was doing and what I was making the decision to commit myself to for the next however many years. I had to be sure that I was sure. Now, 2 years later, there we were celebrating my little sister earning her BFA with an emphasis in screenwriting. I was so super proud of her as she had landed an amazing opportunity that would take her to the other side of the globe. Now, though I would miss her tremendously, this was no time for me to be selfish or jealous. She had worked extremely hard throughout the course of her program for this very moment, and she deserved it. And I could only imagine the sheer joy she must be experiencing, having proof that all of her labor had not been in vain. It seemed that as soon as she touched ground, her career just began to soar. Things were going very well for Joy in North Carolina. In her first 3 years, she received various awards and other accolades for her contribution to the industry there. My parents and I were able to fly in to attend some of the beautiful ceremonies held in an effort to celebrate many of her wonderful achievements. It was heartwarming to observe others honoring my sister and showing admiration towards her for the talent and gifting that we'd become privy to in her so many years ago. We were certainly proud. And during our visits, my sister always made sure to carve out a full day that was dedicated to just our family unit. No lights, no cameras, no actors, just us. These moments were precious to her. They were those special instances where she could let her hair down and be herself. Times where she was free from the confines of others' expectations of her. She was able to settle into a place where things were familiar, and you could see the refreshing taking place. She engaged in liberation moments that were void of deadlines and of phone calls and of emails. It was just us, and she soaked up every single second of it. Actually, we all did. It was just like old times. Now, saying our goodbyes was always the most difficult part. She didn't want us to leave, and we didn't want to go. But life and responsibilities called each of us back to our duty stations. Before our departure, she always made us pencil in dates on her calendar as to when we'd visit again. And she and I, just like when we were little girls, would make a pinky promise that we'd stay true to those dates. I'd worked hard to ensure that we'd honor those dates to the best of our ability. I'd come to the realization that our visits were a former desire that now stood as a present need. Our interactions with Joy had been the source of her staying grounded. They helped to remind her of who she was and even whose she was. Our stays provided her with the energy that she needed to do so she could maintain who she had become to so many people. I had a different type of access to Joy than most others, so this observation was a weighty matter for me. I never spoke of it aloud because I didn't want my parents to worry, and I didn't want my sister to break. So I prayed, quietly and often. As she continued prospering in her career, Joy began to travel more often. With her newfound influence in places outside of North Carolina, the ceremonies were spread out all over the globe, which made it more difficult for us to attend. Not to mention, the invitations were becoming sparse. Because of the opportunities that were pouring in at a steady pace, Joy wasn't able to make it home too often either. Though we talked to each other on the phone every other week, the conversations had become brief and surface-based at best. Things were not quite the same between Joy and I wasn't able to put my finger on why. Was it just me? I began to wonder if it was because so much time had passed since we'd physically seen each other. It was going on 3 years and I felt somewhat estranged from my sister, something I had never experienced before. I needed to put my hands on her. I needed to be able to tell her I love you to her face, and I needed to do it as soon as possible. After discussing it with my parents, we decided that we were going to fly into North Carolina and surprise her. So I called her up to gently probe in order to ensure that she wasn't traveling this week before finalizing our plans. This would be just what she needed. Just what we all needed, because my parents were missing her too. Even though they never articulated the words, I picked up on what they didn't say in our conversations about her. This surprise weekend would certainly be one for the books. So once we touched down in North Carolina, we'd taken a taxi to her condo from the airport. And once we arrived there and knocked on the door, we realized that she wasn't at home. So we decided to go to the management office and explain how we had flown in to surprise her for the weekend. And so they let us in. Her place was so elegant and pristine, just so joy. Everything still looked brand new, almost like no one even lived there. So we decided we'd get some dinner started cooking and wait for her to come home. So while my mom and I were preparing things, we heard a key turning in the door. We could not wait to see the surprised look on Joy's face once she turned the knob. So we all gathered and lined up right in front of the door, only to end up being the recipients of the surprise. It wasn't Joy. It was a young lady named Andrea that Joy had appointed to periodically come check on the place. Once we had a chance to talk things through with her, she informed us that Joy had purchased another home in Atlanta, one that she had failed to mention to us. She only lives in North Carolina 3 months out of the year, and this time frame didn't happen to fall within those designated months. We were all taken aback and speechless with the news we'd just received. How is it that Joy failed to mention this to us? Initially, I was upset, close to furious at this point, but I worked to contain myself for my parents' sake. They were disappointed. My father began to question if Joy was maybe mad with us or even just at them. And I assured them that that was not the case and I would work to get to the bottom of things. I stepped outside and I called Joy's cell phone. No answer. I called again. No answer. So I tried one last time and she picked up on the final ring. She had the nerve to sound a bit annoyed, but I didn't care. I explained to her that we were there in North Carolina to surprise her, only to end up the recipients of the surprise. She apologized for the mix-up as she rushed to get off the phone for her next appointment. Before disconnecting the line, she said something that sent my mind spiraling. She said, "I'm a drifter, babe. You are too, just a different kind. We're kindred spirits. Remember that." I was furious about her nonchalant apology and livid with her accusation of me. Before I knew it, I was walking down the sidewalk, on the verge of stomping down the sidewalk. And then it hit me. Then it hit me like a ton of bricks. The jolt I felt almost took my breath away, and almost knocked me off my feet. She was right. Absolutely right. We were. we are kindred spirits. I am a drifter too, only in the spiritual realm. I had been watching this movie of our lives through foggy lenses, but Joy had seen clearly. I spent so much time focusing on her outward wandering that I had never shined the light on my subtle internal rootlessness. I stood there feeling paralyzed in this moment of discovery. I couldn't remember the last time that I'd really communed with God. I couldn't remember the last time that I'd even been to church. And I couldn't remember the last time that I had told someone about Jesus. What happened? I had been running well for a long time for God, but I couldn't pinpoint what had hindered me. At this point, it didn't matter. What mattered was that I needed to get my focus back in check and get my life back aligned with my initial pursuit before engaging in any self-serving activities. You know, as the oldest, I'd always felt this need to teach my little sister along the way so she wouldn't stumble. But tonight, her lesson calls me to realize that I had already fallen on the ground. Though this was not the intention of the trip, it became it. And it did end up being a weekend for the books. One where I would be rebuked, refreshed, restored, and reconciled. And it became the weekend where I would stabilize my anchor in an effort not to be found drifting ever again.
you for tuning in to Creative Inspiration with Chantel. We pray you've been inspired and strengthened. And until next Saturday, be encouraged on the journey. You may contact Chantel at www.kingdomliteraryworks.com.